Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue with chapter 3, part 3 of the book The World's Greatest Ghost by Roger Bohr. This one once again talking about horrific hauntings. Already some really good examples of some very frightful encounters that people have had with various ghosts and poltergeist, including some that apparently kill people. You'll see that in the past video. In fact, so check that out when you have a chance. This one has a new segment called Beware of the Bones. I'll go ahead and I'll start this part here and then continue the chapter on the next part as well. It's probably going to be a few more parts before the chapter ends. So again, this next segment is called Beware of the Bones. The dead keep a vengeful watch. And of course, I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on everything afterward. So here's what the segment says. People who tamper with the remains of the dead or ignore the last wishes of the dying do so at their peril. It seems that the spirits of the departed keep a careful watch on their earthly relics and are quick to intervene if anything untoward happens to them. An American farmer called Wansingbaum was exploring his new home in Oakville, Virginia, when he came across an ancient skeleton and threw it into a lime kiln. Soon doors began to slam in the middle of the night, chairs were mysteriously overturned, and bells tolled throughout the rooms. Walsingham was not a superstitious man. He put the curious sounds down to mischief by neighbors. Then a series of things happened which he could not ignore. They were described by the San Francisco Examiner in 1891. First, the man's dog began barking furiously at a wall. One day the animal lunged towards it and fell back yelping, its neck broken as if somebody had hurled its body backwards. Hideous laughter, shouts, and wails began coming from all over the house. One of Walsingham's daughters saw a disembodied hand grasp her shoulder, and the farmer watched aghast as the prints of a naked pair of feet formed beside him as he walked in the rain. The last straw for the family came at a dinner party. Guests shrugged off strange groans from the moon above. Then a red stain began to form on the white tablecloth, spreading as more scarlet drips fell from the ceiling. The men in the party raced upstairs and began tearing up the floorboards, but they only found dry dust, even though the liquid, later identified by chemical tests as human blood, continued to spread on the table. The Walsinghams packed their belongings and moved out of the haunted home. A skull called Odd Nance had caused headaches for successive occupants of Burton Agnes Hall, a beautiful English mansion in a village between Bridlington and Dryfield in Yorkshire. For more than 300 years, the gruesome relic has insisted on staying in the house. Those who have tried to get rid of it have been forced to think again. The hall was built by three spinster sisters early in the 17th century, financed by a legacy from their father, Sir Henry Griffith. Soon after the building was completed, robbers ambushed the youngest sister Anne as she returned from visiting friends in nearby Hartman. Villagers gently carried her battered body home. She was well cared for, but her injuries were so severe that it was clear she would never recover. Shortly before she died, Anne made an extraordinary request. She insisted that her sisters cut off her head before they buried her body and preserve it in the walls of her beloved home. She threatened that if they did not do so, dire consequences would follow. The two sisters promised they would follow her wishes, but the idea horrified them. When Anne died, they buried her body intact. 7 days later, an inexplicable crash in an upstairs room woke the whole household. After another week, the family were again roused from their sleep when doors slammed in every part of the building. 3 weeks after the funeral, they lay terrified in their beds all night as the whole house shook with the clatter of crowds of invisible beings running along corridors, up and down the stairs. Agonized groans echoed throughout the room. Next morning, the servants quit. The sisters called in the local vicar, and when they mentioned Anne's dying wish, he agreed to open the grave. The body was just as they had last seen it, except for the head. That had been cut off, and all the skin had shriveled away, leaving the skull bare. Reluctantly, the sisters carried the grim memento into the hall, The haunting ceased. The skull stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Subsequent owners of Bert and Agnes have dared to throw out the odd, nuanced skull, but each time, mysterious shuffling and scratching sounds, slamming doors, and terrifying groans had forced them to restore the relic to its rightful place. Other ghosts have been responsible for the finding of human bones in places where they should not have been. Such specters Spanish only once the bones have been given a decent burial. Guests at a house in Linton, Devon complained during the 1930s that they could never ever get a decent night's sleep in the room above the scullery. They told their host, the Ewing family, that they saw the ghost of an old woman and heard the sobbing of a child. Then Mrs. Ewing's brother-in-law realized that the haunted bedroom was much narrower than the scullery below it. The family discovered a cupboard which had been walled up. Inside was a child's box and a collection of ancient human bones. Only when those bones were removed, did peace reign in the house. Frederick Fisher was a poor Australian farmer whose profits from crops never covered the cost of his living. Eventually, he was taken to court and jailed for debt. To stop creditors from seizing his farm in Campbellton, New South Wales, he transferred it to the name of an associate called George Worrell. 6 months later, Fisher finished his sentence and returned to his home. But one night in 1826, he left a nearby inn after a heavy drinking session and was never seen again. Police investigated the disappearance but could not find any evidence of foul play. Months went by. Then came the dark night that neighbor James Farley got the shock of his life. A strange figure was sitting on one of the fences, pointing to a spot in Fisher's paddock. Farley was too scared to do anything until daylight. Next morning, he guided a police constable to the site that the phantom had indicated, and in the shallow grave discovered the badly beaten body of Farmer Fisher. George Worrell was questioned and found to be an ex-convict. He confessed and was hanged. His victim's ghost was never ever seen again. Then there's a little mini segment entitled Vigilante Tragedy. A white phantom caused a bizarre tragedy in Hammersmith, London in 1804. Vigilante patrols were set up after the ghost chased and seized a woman as she walked through a graveyard. She died from shock a few days later. 16 people traveling past the church on a horse-drawn cart also fled the eerie shape. On the fourth night of the vigil, one of the volunteers, Customs Officer Francis Smith, spotted a figure in white moving down a nearby lane. He shot at it and the figure fell. But it was not a ghost. It was bricklayer Thomas Millwood coming home late from work in his white overalls. Smith was tried for manslaughter and sentenced to death, but on appeal, the sentence was reduced to a year in prison. Then there's another mini segment called Voices from the Grave. Frederick Jurgensen's tape recorder plays back voices of the dead. Jurgensen, a Stockholm artist, said he has no idea how the voices got on his tapes, yet over several years his machines has picked up more than 140 voices, including those of Adolf Hitler and Death Row's Carly Chessman. Hitler's voice was the first to appear on Jurgensen's tape in 1960. He had recorded a memorandum and, when playing back his notes, heard other voices. He had the machine tested, but nothing was wrong with it. Yet when he made a further tape and played it back, his voice was drowned out. This time, the sounds were voices saying, we live, we are not dead." A German engineer listened to the tape and identified the voice as Hitler's. The voice seemed to be apologizing for concentration camp atrocities. The voice was compared with recordings of Hitler and was again identified as the voice of the Nazi leader. And then the next segment is called The Tennessee Demon. The terror that sent John Bell to his grave started in 1817. At first, they were just scratching noises at doors and windows as though someone or something was trying to get into his remote farmhouse home in Robertson County, Tennessee. Farmer John would look outside, but there's nothing to be seen. It was worrying, even frightening, but he was able to reassure his wife and children until the night whatever had been trying to enter his house succeeded. Frightening sounds filled the rooms, the rush of wings, a rat-like gnawing, the muffled pad of animal paws. As days passed, the noises grew louder and stronger, as if whatever was causing them was growing in power. The raps became actual solid crashes, and there were muffled gasps and gurgles as if someone was trying to talk. In the upstairs room where she slept alone, 13-year-old Betsy Bell awoke one night screaming. An invisible force was pinching and slapping her. There were similar attacks on the other children, and they steadily grew in ferocity. The terrified family, all well liked churchgoers, tried to keep their horrors secret, although friends noticed John Bell was looking sick and haunted. Finally, they could stand it no longer and invited a neighbor, James Johnson, to their home and told him the horrid story. Johnson, a lay preacher, listened and tried to exorcise the demon. Despite his hymns and prayers, the attempt failed, and the angry demon slapped poor Betsy, knocking the screaming girl to the floor. The family begged John to take him away from the house, but he refused. He said the demon was his cross to bear and refused to budge. The demon grew stronger. The gurgle turned to a husky, rasping whisper that would coo and curse, recited whole chapters from the Bible, and then lapsed into obscene blasphemies. The demon's words were, for the most part, a frightful gibberish, but each message carried the same theme. It hated John Bell and swore it would hound him to the grave. Fear now spread through the country, and the family's once loyal friends began to shun them. Some believed that young Betsy was the witch. Old John's mind and body finally broke under the terrible assault, and he suffered frequent convulsions. A doctor had prescribed medicine for the old man, and during one attack, his son went to get it. Instead of the doctor's medicine, he found a bottle filled with murky fluid. The family sent for the doctor, and while they waited, the demon rampaged triumphantly throughout the house. Its whisper was a hoarse grunt. "I've got him this time. I gave him a big dose while he was sleeping, and old Jack is done for now." John Bell died on December 20th, 1820. The doctor tested the potion on a cat, and it died. He told the inquest, "All the time I could hear that cursed thing laughing and gloating. Oh, I know some people hint that Betsy had been throwing her voice, and I thought it was possible too. But when I clapped my hand across her mouth, the voice kept sniggering and talking." After the funeral, the demon told the family it would return in 7 years. Right on time, it again visited the family, but both the son, John Jr., and Betsy were happily married. Disappointed, the demon said it would return in 107 years. The threat was never carried out, and in 1935, it passed safely for John's heir, Dr. Charles Bell. And then there's another segment, mini one, that's called Lesson of Death. 12 schoolboys were shocked to see their classmate John Daniel sitting at his desk. For 7 weeks earlier, John had been found dead 200 yards from his home in Beaminster, Dorset. His death had been recorded as from natural causes after his mother said he suffered from fits. After questioning the 12 boys, local magistrate Colonel Broadrep ordered the body to be exhumed, and an inquest in 1728 revealed that John had been strangled. The murderer was never caught. John's ghost never returned to his old school, but his pathetic figure has been seen in nearby St. Mary's Church. Let's go ahead and we'll pause it here. Some good little segments to talk about with regards to this chapter. And then once again, love to hear what your own thoughts and comments are too. Interesting stuff, right? When it comes to these segments, first you had the one associated with the bones. It looks like you have that situation where, wow, if something happens with taking some bones away from an area, who knew that it would suddenly cause a lot of frightful encounters, a multitude of them apparently happening over various nights. I've talked about one of these actually. There was the one associated with the woman, the one who wanted the head cut off. There was that poor young girl who was basically assaulted on the way back from an area, and then the robbers, who remained pretty much unidentified, beat her to the point where she was essentially left for dead. And then before she died, she made the request to please. This was that poor young girl, Anne, stating that, yes, please keep my head. As bizarre as it sounds, keep it in the home to make sure that nothing bad happened to her, or in other words, she would threaten everyone else with severe hauntings. And so the family, the two sisters, naturally decided, we're not doing that after she died. And then sure enough, there was hauntings afterward. I remember talking about that within one of my channel's videos. What I don't recall was the other one associated with the strange situation about hideous laughter, shouts, and wails from that home involving a farmer by the name of Walsingham. Interesting that it had blood falling at one point from the ceiling, and even though it looked dry from the top of the area, in other words, from the top of the room that it was in, now it was wet when it was coming down onto the actual bottom floor. So talk about a strange set of physics when it comes to that situation. I'm wondering if that house is still there to this very day, or if there's something else associated with it, something else completely just supernatural too. And then I did talk about the Farley incident as well. Here you had that situation, I'm sorry, the farmer associated with Fisher. This was the guy who was eventually killed, but his ghost came up to an area and pointed to someone else, in this case a neighbor by the name of James Farley, to let him know that what had happened to him as far as his disappearance was not natural. And then sure enough, that's when it was linked to the other person, the person who took over the home, causing his death, and then that person eventually being executed afterward. But it was that ghost, that telltale ghost that did that experience. I remember talking about that in one of my videos too. I love this stuff. I love being able to see what I've mentioned in the past in some of my videos, and then seeing it here within this book. It's a nice little precursor, like a review again of some of the other things. And then the last one, the Tennessee Demon. Isn't this the famous movie, right? Isn't it The Conjuring, if I'm not mistaken? The Bell Incident, the Bell Witch, in other words. Here you had something where it was this poor guy, who knows why. John Bell was essentially being targeted by this demon slash witch, but it was definitely causing very, very bad experiences, once again to the point of causing the actual death of a person. Remember in the other video, it was the snapping of necks that was causing the deaths of some people, and the strangulation that was causing the deaths of others. Here it was more on the lines of a poison. So imagine that you have a witch slash demon that could actually get a hold of some kind of poison and then cause the person to drink it inadvertently, but of course causing their death. What a crazy way to go. You do not want that situation. I could totally feel for that guy when he was described later on as looking just absolutely a shell of the man that he was before, because of the constant attacks associated with this witch slash demon, and of course what happened afterward. So definitely very bad thing, and it's one of the most famous tales associated with hauntings. And again, pointed out too in the comments, isn't this the one, right? The Conjuring, associated with the movie and so on about the Bell Witch. But otherwise, let me know. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.